Section 8 gives Congress enumerated powers, including the ability to carry out the common defense, the taxing power, and the sole power over foreign affairs. The taxing power continues to be important. In National Federation of Independent Business versus Sebelius, 2012, the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act as a tax. These powers are missing under the Articles of Confederation. Therefore, we agree that Article 1, Section 8 is one of the most important sections of the Constitution. Under the Articles, Congress was unable to raise sufficient money to pay its debts, nor did it have the authority to establish an army, relying on the states to respond to its call to arms. For instance, in Shays' Rebellion, the federal government was unable to raise the necessary military presence, and the troops were in fact raised and paid for by Massachusetts merchants. Congress held no power to tax under the Articles. For example, in 1781, Congress requisitioned states for $8 million, but received less than $500,000. Hamilton noted in Federalist 30 that the Confederation's inability to requisition money has reduced us to a situation which affords triumph to our enemies.
The ability to control commerce between the states has been arguably the most important power. It is certainly the most litigated. As Congress did not have this power in the Articles of Confederation, the Commerce Clause was essential to reducing economic conflicts that afflicted under the states under the Articles. The state argued among themselves. Southern newspapers openly discussed dividing the country into 4 nations, Eastern, Middle, Southern, and Trans-Allegheny. The strength of the powers granted to Congress were shown when Justice Marshall interpreted the Commerce Clause in Gibbons v. Ogden, 1824, to prohibit New York from acting contrary to the national interest. Article 1, Section 8, specificity reflects adverse experiences with unrestrained legislatures under the states. State legislatures often had excessive power and the executives were not strong. In Federalist 49, Madison observed that the legislative branch, having the greatest direct influence over the people, had the most power to encroach. The specificities of powers granted to Congress made it clear the limit of Congress's powers so other branches could operate.
The necessary and proper clause was inserted in the Constitution according to Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 33 as a supremacy clause to ensure that the states would not be able to limit Congress to the strict letters of the enumerated powers. As Justice Marshall held in McCulloch v. Maryland, 1819, the necessary and proper clause was meant to enlarge, not to reduce, the ability of Congress to execute its enumerated powers. Congress has successfully used this clause to allow it to solve problems that the framers could not have envisioned. Today, the Supreme Court accepts the challenges of interstate commerce to regulate any activities affecting it, even where those activities are entirely within the state, such as in Gonzalez v. Raich, 2005. In National Labor Relations Board v. Jones, 1937, the court voted to uphold the union organization of employees at a Pennsylvania steel plant because it found the steel industry to be interstate web of activities. We are now ready for your questions.
Great. All right. So your first follow-up question is, what are the benefits and the dangers of placing quote-unquote elastic powers in the hands of a representative government?
The dangers of having enumerated of having the necessary and proper clause.
Yeah, elastic powers, sort of powers that are sort of not super specific, but somewhat general and left to be interpreted potentially.
Yeah, so which are necessary and proper clause. Yes. The dangers of having such powers is that some people might interpret them too loosely and allow themselves to step boundaries and do things that they are not supposed to do just because it's not written there.
An example of this could be in Gonzalez v. Raich, where Congress expanded their commerce power to regulate interstate commerce regarding marijuana in California.
Right. What legislation do you expect Congress to consider this term, and discuss what you think will happen to that legislation?
This term with new Congress, one legislation that they're planning to try and pass is the Keystone Pipeline, and Obama has already come out and said that if they try to bring this bill up to him, up to his desk, he's going to veto it.
Thank you.
Why?
believe because of all the natural risks that it can cause, because of all the previous accidents with oil, such as the big oil spill in the ocean. So having all that oil and that pipeline in our soil and stuff, and if there's an accident and breaks, it could damage our land and our supplies.
So, do you tell me what you think necessary and proper meant when it was written and what it means now?
I feel that when it was written, the necessary and proper clause was a clause to expand Congress's power as they moved through time, so that as times changed, they can create legislation that moved with it. An example of this would be McCulloch v. Reich, where the Supreme Court said that it was necessary for Congress to have a national bank so that they could store money that they gained from taxing.
And nowadays, necessary and proper clause is inserted and added to like taxing powers and commerce clause to enlarge it even too far in some cases.
Why is it too far?
An example of it being too far would be, as my colleague said earlier, the Gonzalez v. Reich case, which medicinal marijuana was legal in California, but then the Congress deemed that it was unconstitutional, and they used the necessary and proper to expand the Commerce Clause to intrastate, so inside the state.
So, David, I think you mentioned that this section of the Constitution controls commerce between the states and largely gets to sort of regulation of laws between the federal government and the state. To the group, do you guys think that there is sufficient language and specificity in the Constitution to regulate what federal government powers have versus what state powers should be?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, is there sufficient guidance in the language of the Constitution to properly regulate exactly what is a federal power versus a state power?
Well, there is the enumerated powers that is given to Congress, which tells Congress what powers they can do, and then it's kind of implied that the powers that they don't have, that Congress doesn't have, kind of falls into the state's hands to decide.
And that's why they strictly made the enumerated powers for the federal government, so that they can't inflict on states' rights.
You've talked a lot about the taxing power in Article 1, Section 8. Can you talk about the relationship of the taxing power there to other parts of the Constitution, such as the 16th Amendment?
So you're asking us to compare the taxing power to some other amendments in the Constitution?
Right. I mean, the taxing power is certainly discussed in Article 1, Section 8, but that's not the only place it's discussed. And so I'm wondering, why does the Constitution have it in multiple places? What's the logic there?
I feel that they placed it in Article 1, Section 8 to specifically state that Congress had this power, but then placed it in later parts of the Constitution to elaborate on it further.
So can you connect some of the enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8 with some current issues we're facing, recognition of Cuba, immigration, and so forth?
Well, so far we have problems with immigration, and what Obama said is he made a specific rule saying that we should let some certain people that have clean records and are civilian people stay here so that they don't get deported. But the reason he said it is because we don't have the budget to deport every single case and every single family out of our country.
Okay, we'll leave it without a budget. Okay, so I want to